Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 116. And today is the moment we've been all waiting for. We're diving into the earliest possible data from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Before we go into the meat and potatoes of the episode, I would like to thank my sponsor from mtgazone.com. And I would like to thank my patrons. We have two new patrons this week, and that is Stefan and Jeff. So thank you very much for your support. But if you are on the fence about becoming my patron, please do become my patron. That always helps me with the motivation. And you get some perks, including slides for this presentation. It will be also quite nice if you are on the right tier to look through the slides if you're listening to the podcast, or just screen through them on your own pace just to get accustomed with the format. And you also get access to all the other slides that I released so far. Also, there is a sort of new sponsor I'm going to be talking in a second. So that's the exciting news from this week. I have my own personal code and you can buy stuff in my name. Unfortunately, it only works when you are in UK, but you can still buy the product if you're not, just like you can't use the code. And thank you for the rate, Hanagram. I'm going to make my exception of not calling people out during the podcast, but Hannah is a German streamer who I sometimes visit her stream. And today I am rewarded by being rated by her. So thank you very much for that. Okay. As I said, I am now an ambassador. I take part in the creator program for the bulk box. And it was like super, super easy because I already was a user of the product for like 2 years. This is literally my box with all my bulk, what I call functional bulk, because I draft in paper and I buy some packs because I'm an addict. It's my problem. But whenever you draft, you're left off over with chaff, and most of it is completely valueless, and I don't bother keeping it. It's like cards, I don't see any potential, but there is this thing, what I call useful bulk. And I tend to keep them. I try to guess which cards might be playable in some format. And I always have like separate sections for different sets. So I played a lot of Mom, for example, and I have those Mom cards in the box. This is my started collection from OTJ, cards that I think might be playable in some kind of constructed formats. I pick all the non-basic lands because I think, maybe one day deserts will be busted because of some new printing. So I keep all the deserts. For example, I kept all the dead lands from Streets of New Capenna, the sacrifice ones, and now they're useful because they're played in the Aftermath Analyst. Can save myself like £3 on shipping if I want to order them from someone. Obviously, this comes with the clutter, and I started using bulk box just because it looked attractive and much better than white boxes. And I heard good things about sturdiness, so I bought it and I used it for 2 years. And fast forward 2 years, and they offered a program for people that want to promote the product, and I decided to go in because I'm already using it. So promoting something that I'm happy with using is not something that is beneath me. It's great, easy to assemble, sturdy. I mean, 2 years and I use it. It's not like a storage box. I don't just keep it in my garage and never open. Every week I open it, rearrange it, sort my bulk, remove some cards, and keep some cards. And thanks to that, I have 4 copies of Make Disappear because I drafted them and I kept them and I have them and I don't need to be bothered with ordering it. So if you're interested, you can go to the bulkbox.co.uk/store. And if you're in UK, you can use the code SHERKO10, that's SIERKO 10, and buy yourself some storage boxes. If you are outside of UK, you can still go to the same website and you can find your local distributor. I know that they have a distributor in US and they sell via eBay to European viewers like Hannah, for example. Unfortunately, then you cannot use my code, which is a shame for me, but my loss is your gain because you're getting a decent box that actually looks good and is made in a way that is environmentally aware, which is also something important. I bloody work in sustainability field. I research sustainability. I better have a sustainable bulk box since I'm already playing a very unsustainable card game. My pitch for it, but give it a look. Not now though, because now we're moving into the episode and we're going to be talking about data. Before we go to the main topic of the early data, I had a question from a patron That's one of the perks that you can get if you become my patron. You can ask a question, and occasionally they will appear in the episode. And the question is from Trezio, and it's using pack and slot frequencies and assuming that all deserts are equally distributed across 8 drafters and all are main decked, what is the average number of deserts each player is likely to have in their deck? And this question reminds me so much. My daughter has an exam this week, and she's in year 6. And it reminds me of the exercises that she has to solve in her maths part of the test that I've been spending last 3 weeks repeating with her endlessly. Poor thing is at the end of her wits because of how much math repetition we did. But I decided, okay, if she can be tortured with mathematical problems like that, so can I. I can read all the assumption and I will try to answer to the best information we have. So first of all, there are 15 deserts in the set, and 12 of them are at common, but 10 of them are in the land slot, and 2 are common in a regular slot, and there are also 3 uncommon deserts in the set. So we start like that. Based on looking at ALSA and the number of times the cards are being seen in the set, so here we have ALSA from 1 to 9, and here we have number of times that the cards have been seen, and these are all commons. You can see that those dual deserts are not at the same frequency as regular commons, because they have the same ALSA, but you see them much, much less than you do regular commons. And this comes from the fact that according to WotC, and that's what I took as my benchmark, according to WotC, those dual deserts appear in 50% of the packs, which means we have 24 packs in the pod. You will open 12 deserts in the given draft of those 10 dual deserts. So that's the first part of the answer. We have 12 dual deserts then. Based on the same graph, I rudimentarily calculated the frequency of commons, because you can sort of align them, calculate how much more frequently they appear than those deserts, which are my benchmark, as I said before. And you can calculate, it comes out as roughly 2.05 of each common per pod that is being open. But I started looking at the data and I noticed one thing, and I don't know if it's a quirk in the 17 lands data, or is it a quirk of how people are drafting cards. When I looked at this graph, colorless cards tend to be slightly more frequent in the packs than colored cards. I don't know if it's 100% linked to the pack collation. Maybe they had to change some small things because you get 50 different bonus slots or whatever. Whatever the reason is, we see them slightly more frequently. It might have something to do with a weird distribution of how people are picking them, but I so far don't have that kind of data, so I can't really infer that from what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is that they are roughly 5% more frequent. Because they are roughly 5% more frequent, there is approximately 2.15 per pod of those 2 common deserts, including conduit pylons. So that's extra 4.3 deserts. When I looked at the uncommon slots, here are all the colorless uncommons, and they also seem to be slightly more prevalent than regular uncommons, again by 5%, which makes me think it is possible that there's some discrepancy in the data, that people draft them in a very particular way that changes the property of the ALSA of those cards. But because I can't really disprove it using the data that I have, so I assume that they are also 5% more frequent than regular uncommons. And the other interesting thing is the blue things are the bonus sheet uncommons. They seem to be slightly less common than other uncommons by, again, around 5%. So you will see fewer of them. So because regular uncommons are at 0.9 per pod, colorless look 5% more frequent. And again, side note, bonus sheet looks 5% less frequent, but that gives us 0.945 uncommon deserts per pod. And we have 3 of them. So if you calculate it, it will be roughly 2.8 of those uncommon deserts opened in each pod. When we add all those numbers together, we get 19.1 deserts per pod, and that gives roughly 2.4 deserts per player. But of course, some of those will be bucolic ranch, which is pretty bad. So realistically, we're looking at roughly 17 deserts per pod of the playable ones. And there, again, we can have a quarrel whether Arid Mesa is playable or not. Arid Archway, sorry. Arid Mesa is playable. So, yeah, 2.4 per player, assuming everyone picks the same amount and everyone plays each of them in their deck. I guess that 2 players need to rip one of the deserts in a non-even ratio and play 0.4 somehow. This moves us to the main topic, and this is going to be the early data. Again, as I said before I started the seminar, this is a very early data. Treat it with a pinch of salt. Don't use it as absolute statement, please. And definitely don't quote me as if I was giving absolute statement. I might be using more direct language just to avoid awkwardness, but generally take it with a pinch of salt. Don't use it as an order, but use it as an information that you can act on whenever you see any kind of data from here. So this format is 2 days old. It's still very much in the development stage. And because of that, it's just not wise to assume that archetype X is the Basto thing and we have to draft only that, because I'm pretty sure that what you see in the early data is very much not going to be true in a week's time. And I'm hoping that people are watching me not to be told what to do, but to be told how to interpret the data and how to use that data in order to advance their understanding of the format. And if that's the case, I'm super happy. If you just listen and are waiting to be told what to do, I'm probably not the content creator for you, because I will give suggestions, but I'm definitely not giving orders. So first thing, we have the color balance. I looked at the composition of the decks and how many times were they played, and I looked at which color is the most played. And you would expect if each color was played equally, there would be around 20%. And they are all quite close to 20%, honestly. But somehow green is played 5 percentage points more than you would be expecting just from pure kind of mathematical, perfectly balanced format situation. Those small numbers of being underplayed by blue is being underplayed by 2.5 percentage points. White is being underplayed by 1.5 percentage points, and you get half percentage points for black and red. And that makes green the 5 percentage point overplayed color. And if we look at the win rates, green not only is the most played color, but also has the highest win rate. And that's as clear of a day a suggestion to me that green is the most powerful color in the format. But it's not like excessively powerful. The difference between the weakest color win rate, which is blue, of 52.7%, and the most winning color, which is green, of 57.3%, it's only 4.5 percentage points, which is something, but it's not nothing. It's not like excessive. We've seen worse formats in terms of the split between the best and the worst color. More importantly, white, which is still relatively underdrafted, it's only drafted more than blue is actually the second most winning color with 56%. So just 1.2 percentage points below green. Now, a lot of it is driven by the fact that, spoiler alert, Selesnya is the highest win rate color combination, but not only Selesnya decks are quite strong, and there are some white archetypes that are doing pretty decently. And then black comes at third place at around 55%, which is just around the average win rate for the format of 55.2. And then we have red, which is drafted as the second most color, but only has 53.4% win rate. And this is, I think, since I started doing this kind of exact layout of the slides for the early data look, I think that this is the first time when 17 lens users are, for 2 days, are stuck in doing the wrong thing. This will quickly shift, and they are going to figure out what to do. But for now, and you will see that in a second, it seems to me that 17 lens players still did not completely grasp the format, and they are drafting color pairs that are not winning, or they are drafting the color pairs in such a way that they are not winning with them. And in the last place, and also the one that is least drafted, is blue. Seems that blue is just a a weaker color. It's not unplayable by any stretch of imagination, but it does worse. And I think that at least some part of it is because of how people are drafting it. And I think that I'm going to show a couple of cards that maybe you should start watching more carefully and picking more highly and playing more aggressively and including them in your deck. Torpid Ninja is asking, that's a good question. Is there any amount of chicken egg with color preference and winning? In all fairness, the more you pick a color, the less it should be winning. Because if all the people would draft green, then green would be so overdrafted that it would stop winning. So if green is picked a lot and still wins a lot, that indicates power, and that indicates actually that despite being drafted a lot by 17 lens user, it still has capacity of being drafted more and still being quite winning. Keep in mind, I show you the data from 17 lands. 17 lands players are, according to my estimates, around 2%. Some people estimate around 10% of the arena user base. So there's plenty of players that are not 17 lens user, and maybe they draft more blue, maybe they draft more white, because on average you should be drafting similar amounts of each color because that's what you have in packs. So the fact that 17 lens users draft a lot of green does not necessarily mean that general population is drafting more green. It's probably something like people who are not in the know are drafting blue, white, and not the green decks. And because of that, 17 lens users can opportunistically draft more green. Okay. Now, it's always a question, is a given format a two-color format? And this one seems to be two-color, but not 100% stuck on being two-color. 44% of the decks are pure two-color decks, and 37.6% of the decks are two colors and splash. And then there's like 11% of three-color decks, around 4.4 three colors plus splash, and around 1% of all the decks is more than four colors and more. And also 1% of the decks or games that we analyzed, at least so far, were by monocolored decks with or without splash. So this is a profile of a format that allows splashing quite well, but still the two-color combinations usually in those formats are slightly stronger, so people tend to stick to them. But I think that this format allows three-color decks. So far, my only trophy comes with the absent deck, and it was pure three-color decks. I had like black was my splash, and I had 6 black cards in it, so that's quite a lot. They were multicolored, but still counts. Okay. So I expect that as the format matures, people figure out those three-color shards / wedges synergies much better. Because they will be better established, people will have better solutions, they will become more popular and also more powerful. But okay, I mean, the fact that people draft splash, two-color and splash decks or three-color decks doesn't mean that those decks are any good. So I checked the win rates. Okay, obviously monocolor decks usually have a high win rate, and that's fact. They just don't come together very often. So it's in theory, it's very good to draft a monocolor deck, but in practice, you never will get a monocolor deck. But in this format, we see that there is only like 2.5 percentage points advantage of being monocolor. They have around 58% win rate on average. Last time around, it was 62. So a sizable difference between how much the monocolor decks were winning in MKM and how much they are winning here. Two-color decks, 55.8% average win rate. It's close to the average win rate for the format. Two colors and splash, 55.3. So just a half percentage point difference between two-color decks and two-color decks with splashing, which to me indicates that splashing is relatively cost-free in this format. So not only normally splashing is a balance of two factors. So by splashing a card, arguably you're putting more power into your deck because hopefully the card that you splash is there because it's powerful. but you lose consistency, because to splash you need to stretch your mana base slightly. So from this result, it seems to me that adding the extra power at the cost of consistency is working fine, which also leads me to think this format allows for longer games, because usually the longer the games, the cheaper the splashing becomes, because as we know, the best form of fixing is drawing cards, because if you draw all your cards, you definitely will dig into your land for the splashed cards. So that's one thing I can infer from the from this data. But when we look at the 3-color decks, 3-color and splash, and 4-color decks, we don't see that big drop off. You lose around 2 percentage points of win rate, but this is the kind of level that we've seen in Dominaria United, and Dominaria United was notorious for having domain decks which played 5 colors. So this set seems to be on par with things like Dominaria United in terms of how easy it is to splash play 3-color decks and stuff, because we do have those deserts that we talked about in the question from the patron. We do have other kind of ways of fixing. There's a couple of artifacts. There is things that fetch for deserts. There's plenty of that. So it was pretty trivial to build 3-color mana bases. And I drafted quite a lot of 3-color decks, and they were working fine. I'm not saying they were busted, and I'm not saying my win rate in this format so far is extremely high, but I'm still in my exploratory stage. So I'm happy with having a slightly lower win rate than normally in the early days, because I normally use this time to try to explore and figure out what's going on and experiment. And then when you look at the 4-color and splash and 5-color decks, there are numbers there, but also there are so few decks in that slot that you have to take it with a majestic grain of salt, any number that comes from there. It does look, though, that adding colors doesn't cost you that much. So this is also another indicator of a format that is potentially multicolored. Because if you have a pure 2-color format, usually the graph will slope down. So you'll have like most wins at 2-color, and then less, lower win rate, lower win rate, lower win rate, until you get the 5-color that has like, I don't know, 42% win rate. Here we don't see it so far, and it's going to be worth monitoring it over the next couple of weeks, but I expect it not to be a dramatic fall. So we're looking at a format when 5 colors is a possibility. Okay, we talked about the popularity of colors, but obviously we draft colors, but we don't play a color deck. We play most of the time 2-color decks, as you see. Around 82% of all games are with 2-color decks or 2-color decks with splash. So how do the popularity rankings look like? First things first, Selesnya is the most played archetype, 17.3%, whereby in a perfectly balanced format, you would expect that to be around 10%. So 7 percentage points more than you would expect in a perfectly balanced format. Then you have Rakdos, which is 3 percentage points above the play rate that you would expect by, in a perfectly balanced format. Then 2.1 percentage points from Izzet. That's the advantage that they have. And then we go into the colors that are sort of on par with Golgari and Gruul, played around 10%, as you would expect in a perfectly balanced format. And the rest is slightly below. So Boros 9.2, Dimir 8.2, Azorius 7.9, and Simic, unsurprisingly, is the least played color combination. It's always the least played color combination. And Orzhov also at 6%, so 4 percentage points below that expected value for a perfectly balanced format. The fact that Simic is played less doesn't mean that it's the least of the colors. And I think that we are living in times where Simic is, dare I say, one of the better color combinations in 2 sets in a row, which is unprecedented, I think, in the history of the game. So next graph you're going to see are the win rates of each color pair. Again, small sample sizes. I looked only at the pure 2-color decks, no splashing. Some of those decks do better with splashing, some don't, but I'll leave that for you to explore on your own. Important thing is I kept the same order of colors as we have here. So here I listed them from the most played to the least played, and in the next slide they're also listed from the most played to the least played. And normally, those two graphs are similar. The decks that are most played usually have the highest win rate because 17 lens users are pretty good in figuring out what is good and what is winning, and they try to win at all costs, and that includes playing the most winning colors. However, it's not the case in this one. Okay, Selesnya is the most played color and has the highest win rate of 59.6. And second color, very close to Selesnya, is Golgari with 59.2% win rate. But the second and third most played color combinations, Rakdos and Izzet, are actually the two least winning decks in the format so far. Izzet only 51.1% and Rakdos 52.7% of the win rate. And that's way below things like Gruul, which has 57.7, is the third most winning archetype. Orzhov, which is the least played and has 56.7% win rate, above average. Simic also 56.2, barely, but still above the average win rate, while being the second least played by quite a margin also. So if we look, it's more than twice the play rate of Rakdos decks is more than twice as high as a Simic play rate. So quite a big discrepancy. And we don't normally see that. Maybe, people missed one good color combination and don't play it. And that sometimes I see. But I don't remember seeing this graph when top 3 played colors were also in the bottom 2 in terms of win rate. So that's something new. And that means that this is not the format that 17 lens users understand naturally. And there were lots of misses on their side on how this format is going to play out. Now, I'm not saying that every 17 lens user didn't figure it out. I'm sure that there are some that figure out just fine. I'm just saying that as a population, there is a bit of a weird result in terms of people are continuously playing decks that don't post good results. And then we have the sort of mid archetypes, Boros and Dimir, with around 55% win rate, which is not terrible by all means. It's just slightly below, Orzhov and Simic, probably within the error margin. And Azorius with 53.5, not great, but not terrible, as someone said in Chernobyl, I think. But important thing is that sort of Abzan Naya kind of colors look like the place to be in those early days, probably because some really good cards are freely available to be picked. While Izzet, Rakdos are drafted heavily and don't have a very good win rate, which makes me think they don't have a very good win rate because they are drafted so much. And I would expect that once things stabilizes and people start forcing best color combinations, which is frequently the case, they should bounce back a bit. So I wouldn't disqualify them and call them unplayable, especially since I'm hearing from people who have really good results with Izzet and really good results with Rakdos. So it begs me the question, are people winning so little with those color combinations because those color combinations are bad, or quite likely they are losing a lot because they're building those decks badly? And we're going to look through different important cards and maybe cards that are sort of traps. And hopefully based on that, you can build a slightly better intuition on what plans are important for given archetypes. Because by looking at which cards are successful, we're going to maybe have a glimpse in figuring out how to play them and how not to play them at the same time. And we are going to move directly to that. By the way, thank you, Deros, for the sub. I do love my Prime subs because you can only give one, so I feel very special. One a month. Okay, so here is some colors evaluation. I'm going to be looking at best bombs, top commons, top uncommons from each color, just to give you an overlay of what cards are universally good. And then we're going to go into specifics of each color pair, because not always the universally good cards are good in every single archetype. So white bombs, and bombs I defined as cards that have over 62% game and hand win rate so far. Dust Animus, which is a 2-mana 2/3 flyer, but if you plot it and you sort of cast it with, if you control 5 or more untapped lands, it comes into battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters and a lifelink counter, so it becomes a 4/5 flyer with lifelink. Also, if you draw it on turn 7 and you have 7 lands, you just tap 2 lands, cast it, and you have a 4/5 because you have 5 untapped lands. So really good rate for that kind of investment. Then we have Final Showdown. That's the Spree Wrath instant. So for 6 mana, including white, white, white in the cost, it will destroy all creatures, but you can add 1 mana and give one of your creatures indestructibility. And you can also add another mana and all creatures lose all abilities until end of turn. So if you play it, all creatures lose all abilities, then your creature gets indestructible, then you destroy everything, and then hopefully you untap, and then wow, someone in the chat just discovered that they played the Dust Animus as a 3/4 and not as a 4/5. So I do hope that you won with it nonetheless, Chronic. You can always play the third white bomb, Collector's Cage, and put the extra counter. That's the 2-mana artifact from the Big Score bonus sheet. It has Hideaway 5, so when you cast it, you just hide something from the top 5 cards of your library, and then you have 1 and a tap to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. And then if you control creatures with control 3 or more creatures with different powers, and by different powers, it doesn't mean, ooh, I have first strike. No, I have trample. No, it means like 3 different values of power. It basically has Coven. You can play the exiled card without paying its mana cost, so you can actually sneak something really big into play. But I think it's just good on its rate. It's just like tapping to add +1/+1 counter, that you can do instant speed is a great ability. And the fact that you sort of potentially draw a card later in the game and cast it for free, it's just cherry on top. Yargul is asking about the stats for the Dust Animus. This is way too early for me to have that kind of stats. So yeah. That's gonna come, week 4. We're talking when the replay data might come out. So we still have to wait for this. Yeah. So these are the 3 white bombs, but bombs are bombs. You never get them anyway, or at least I never get them. Let's look at the top white commons. And despite skepticism in some content that I was listening to, still it's Take Up the Shield. Nothing changed in the world. Take Up the Shield is still good. Still has the highest win rate. Then we have Trained Arynx, the second best white common, the 2-mana 3/1 mount, and whenever it attacks when it's saddled, it gains first strike, but also you scry 1, which is so important. And it has saddle cost of 2. I mean, best carve out is Trained Arynx on turn 2. On turn 3, you play Miriam, saddle the Arynx, attack with it. It gets a counter, becomes a 4/2 first striker, and the game begins. Also, in this carve out, potentially you can keep Snakeskin Veil mana untapped, so there's nothing opponent can do when you start doing stuff like that. Then we have Mystical Tether. That's the Oblivion Ring at common, and that's the third best white common. It costs 3 mana. You can cast it for 5, and then it has flash. Great card. In case of the top uncommons, there is one that's winning by quite a large margin, and that's Lassoed by the Law. 4 mana Oblivion Ring, but when it ETBs, when it enters, although it still says enters the battlefield, I don't think that they switched completely to the enters part. You create a 1/1 mercenary, the set token that taps at sorcerer speed to give something +1/+0 until end of turn. Shepherd of the Clouds is the second best white uncommon. That's the 4/3 flying vigilance for 5 mana. When it ETBs, you return a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to your hand. But if you control a mount, you put it straight to the battlefield. So if you control a mount, you cast this card, you get so much value because you got like a 3-drop from your graveyard straight to play. I played it in my Abzan deck, and sometimes it happened that I cast Shepherd of the Clouds, I get back Honest Ratstein with it to the battlefield, return another creature to my hand, and then I can cast it for cheaps. It's just brilliant. And Getaway Glamour, the weird removal that destroys a creature if no other creature has greater power, also can work as a sort of instant speed blink spell. That's the third best uncommon in white. Blue bombs. That's it. That's the slide. Not a single blue card crossed the threshold that I set of 62% game in hand win rate. Maybe in a couple of days, something will break that barrier. And there are a couple of candidates, but so far, no. In terms of the top blue commons, all of them are spells. And I think that this is a big hint on what blue wants to be doing in this format. Number one, I have Take the Fall, and that's the blue for an instant. Target creature gets -1/-0 until end of turn, but it gets -4/-0 instead if you control an outlaw and you draw a card. So it's a cantrip that sometimes will be a 2/1, and that's a great thing for 1 mana. Phantom Interference, that's the spree instant. It's either a 2 mana counter spell, sort of like Quench, or a 4 mana instant, make a 2/2 flying creature, or 5 mana both. So a Mystic Snake that puts a 2/2 flyer into play. And that's the second best blue common. And third best blue common, and I think that this is the most underplayed card from this list so far, is Jailbreak Scheme. That's another spree card, and that's blue, and you can add 2 target artifact or creature's owner puts it on top or bottom of their library at sorcery speed. So it would have been busted if it was an instant. And it also has +3 into its cost, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and it can't be blocked this turn. I think rarely used option. Most of the time, this is going to be a 3 mana, put something on top of the owner's library. I've been locked by that card. Opponent cast 3 of them in a row, and I was not very happy about it. But no blue creatures made the top common list. And only one creature made the top uncommons list, but it made it on spot number 1, and that's Marauding Sphinx, the 3 blue for a 3/5 flying vigilance ward 2. And whenever you commit a crime, surveil 2. This ability triggers only once each turn. Card is great because it has very good defensive capability. It doesn't die to removal very easily because of the ward 2, and it can still swing, and nothing really can block it favorably, or most cards can't block it favorably. I never played with it, but I played against it a lot of time, and probably I lost most of those games, so the card is really strong. But then the other 2 cards are just spells, and it's a Repulse from the bonus sheet. I did play it when it was a standard draftable card in the olden days, and it was busted then. Well, guess what? 20-something years passed, and it's still busted. Repulse the 2 and a blue, return target creature to its owner hand, and draw a card. And another bounce spell, and this town ain't big enough. That's 4 and a blue for an instant. It costs 3 less if it targets a permanent you control, and you return up to 2 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. So if you look at it, you have 1 bounce spell, another bounce spell, put on top of the library spell, counter spell, and you have the combat trick with cantrip. So most of the cards in blue that have posted good results so far are spells, and there are no creatures. So I think that one secret of playing blue is to try to avoid the creatures as much as possible and focus on the good blue spells. And hopefully you're going to be getting them quite easily, because when people see the data, they will stop drafting blue that aggressively, and should be more accessible from the next weeks. Now, knowing this and knowing which cards are good, that's the first step of you figuring out how to play blue well, and it will depend from color pair to color pair. My hint is just open Bonnie Poll, and then you're good. Black bombs, we have 2 cards that managed to cross the threshold I set, and number 1 did surprise me. I mean, I know it's a clickbaity headline cliche, but I didn't expect that Hostile Investigator is the highest win rate black card in this set so far. This is one of the big score things. 3 and a black for a 4/3 Ogre Rogue Detective. Rogue Detective? What does it detect? Who stole something from the boss? I find it a bit hard to parse, but okay. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. Whenever 1 or more players discard 1 or more cards, investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. So On the face value, it's a 4/3 that 3/4 because opponent discards, you get the clue, you can later use that clue to draw a card. But in some games, when people have like loot effects that they can't really not do, this will investigate you a couple of times, which is great. And the body is not terrible, and that's why probably it has such a high rate. I just didn't expect it because it has a higher win rate than Gissa the Hellraiser, which is a 3 black human warlock 4/4. It has ward 2 and pay 2 life. So we need to add 2 mana to your costs of the spell and pay 2 life to even target it. And skeletons and zombies you control get +1/+1 and have menace. That's another bonus. And whenever you commit a crime, create 2 tap 2/2 black and blue zombie rogue creature tokens, which importantly are also outlaws. So that's another bonus, that they're not only zombies but zombie rogues. And this ability triggers only once each turn. So if you play it well, you cast Glissa on turn 6 and play the desert to make a crime, and you get instantly those 2/3/3 zombies. And then they have a choice: either we can deal with Nissa, which costs a lot of mana and they will have to pay 2 life, or not and just die. These are the only choices you have, I think. And still, it has a lower win rate than the Hostile Investigator. Now, Glissa has problems. It has 2 black in its cost, which means that you probably have to play heavier black deck. And of course, black is not as strong as green, for example, while Hostile Investigator can be easily splashed. So maybe that's one of the reasons why it's better. Still a bit of a surprise. Again, early days, so don't put too much weight on those results. Top commons in black. And if anything, this shows me that removal is back. The bread is true again. Bombs removal. Because the best winning common is Consuming Ashes. That's a 4 mana instant exile target creature. If it had mana value 3 or less, surveil 2. This card would have been a D in Murders at Karlov Manor, maybe C-. And in this set, it's just very solid. So that shows you the difference in approaching this format. This format does need interaction, I think, because there are so many powerful bombs. If you don't answer them there and then, you are probably very disadvantaged, if not straight up dead. So having cards that can interact and can interact at the instant speed is quite important. And the fact that Consuming Ashes is the top win game in hand win rate black common is sort of making me confident in that statement. And then number 2, we have Desperate Bloodseeker, the 2 mana 2/2 lifelinker. And when it enters the battlefield, target player mills 2 cards, which is great because you can either target yourself when you have graveyard value, or when it matters that you are crowing your graveyards, or if you draw it late in the game and you don't need more graveyard synergies, you can target opponent, and by doing so, you commit a crime. And I mean, this is a fringe thing, but potentially there is some decks that might have a mill opponent out plan. And then Desert Dew is the 3rd best black common. That's a 2 mana instant. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. It gets additional -1/-1 until end of turn for each desert you control. Another removal. So yeah, removal is back, baby. In terms of top uncommons, Hollow Marauder is the number 1. It's 7 mana for a 4/2 flyer, which is not a great rate. So it does something good, I guess. First of all, it hopefully will never cost 7 mana because it costs 1 less for each creature card in your graveyard. Second of all, when it enters the battlefield, any number of target opponents each discard a card. For each of those opponents who didn't discard a card with mana value 4 or greater, you draw a card. So you either nab something really expensive, therefore probably good, and you're happy with that, or you nab something not that expensive or important, maybe like a land that they were keeping in their hand, whatever. But if they discard a land, you draw a card. So every single time it's going to be either a good 2/1 or a slightly less good 3/1, which is not a terrible thing to have. Now think, how similar is this to the Hostile Investigator, which was a 4/3 that makes the opponent discard a card and you sort of draw the card later? And this card can cost 4 mana quite easily if you play turn 1 Desperate Brat Seeker and you hit 2 creatures, all of a sudden it becomes already a 5 mana thing, which is a great price. And 1 creature dies, it becomes a 4 mana thing. It's fantastic. I played again. Once I played with it, but I never managed to cast it because I never drew it. But I played against it, and the card is a pain. And 2 toughness, it seems like it's... Sorry. 2 toughness seems like it's not much, but actually there's just so many other things that you need to target that sometimes it just lives for a couple of turns and deals significant amounts of damage. One knock against it is that there's so much reach in this set, but turns out it doesn't stop it from being the best black uncommon. Second place, and again, I was skeptical about the card myself. I thought it was not that great, but then I looked at the numbers, and numbers look really solid for the black card. That's Shoot the Sheriff. The 2 mana instant, destroy target non-outlaw creature, so it kills anything unless it's an assassin, mercenary, pirate, rogue, or warlock. That surprised me a bit that the card has such a high win rate because, well, first of all, again, some content I was listening to was that, this card is rubbish. It was dead in my hand every single time. And my intuition also told me, like, probably that card is not that great ever. But it turns out it's just good enough, even against mercenary decks. It will eventually find some juicy target. So numbers confirm that the card can be playable and should be played. And Blood Hustler is the third black uncommon. That's the 2 mana 1/1. Whenever you commit a crime, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And it has an ability 3 and a black. Target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, which is committing a crime, which is great for you because it can grow itself later in the game. And this is... I love this card for one reason. This is a sort of design team's way of saying, look, if we want to, we can make a good black creature that grows those +1/+1 counters every turn. And hopefully that's a sign of things to come, and we will stop to get the classic 3 mana 2/3 that whenever something dies gets a counter, but it only happens once each turn, and it only happens at the end of the turn, whatever. These cards were, I don't know, 4 or 5 sets in a row, the worst black creature in the set. And hopefully the design teams knows that by now. And they will start being more creative because they just shown with this card that you can make those cards good. And you could imagine Blood Hustler maybe, like being a 3 mana 2/2 instead of 2 mana 1/1, and maybe the ability costing 5 mana, not 4, and making it in such a way that it would be a sensible common to play. Well, Chronic, Chronic is saying those devs should watch your streams. Who says that they don't? I trust the design team. I'm not in the design team, but I've been listening to some interviews with them, and they are saying all the things that I would love to be hearing. So they are fully aware of those problems. These people know way more about card design than I will ever do. So I'm not going to come in and say, okay, look, I know how to do those things. They know those things, but there are conflicts between what you want to do and what you can do. They need to balance those things. They designed the cars that we're talking about 2 years ago, and we learned so much through the data in those last 2 years. I think that the impact of 17 lands on the card design is going to be visible because people from WotC are not unfamiliar with 17 lands data. I can guarantee you that. So they will do their job, and they know exactly what problems are. Like, for example, one of the mechanics in the set was nerfed in order to make the game slower. And I don't remember which one was that, but that was clearly a conscious design choice responding to the community fears of Magic becoming too fast. We're on the backswing now, and I think that sets are going to move more towards the slower side for the next couple of sets, hopefully, or at least within the next years, it's going to be a reverse trend, because those changes that we want now, of course, Oh yeah, that the mercenaries can block. That was the one. Thank you, Punter. That's great. In the original version, and we're on a great card to talk about it because we're talking about the only red bomb in this format, according to my metric, the Hellspur Posse Boss. 2 red. Other outlaws you control have haste, and when it enters the battlefield, it creates 2 1/1 red mercenary creature tokens with top target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Activate only a sorcery. And in the original design is also would say mercenaries and can't block. But that thing was removed, and now they can block, and it's super annoying when you're playing against someone and you need to smash with your non-trampling creatures, and they just put the mercenaries in front of you and then drain you from Rakish Crew. If they couldn't block, those games would look very differently because the plan of the decks that contain mercenary tokens, the only plan that they could have would be to just jam and be aggressive. And because they can block, all of a sudden you can open all this defensive game and you can open all those aristocrat grindy archetypes. So great choice to slow down the speed of the format just by removing the one wording from a very common token. Hellspur's Posse Boss is the only bomb level card in red. Still more than in blue, which had 0, but that's not impressive. Top commons, Explosive Derailment, all in all, had the highest win rate from all the red cards. Barely overtaking Prickly Pear. Explosive Derailment, by the way, is the red for a spree spell, and you can add 2 mana to deal 4 to target creature, or you can add 2 to destroy target artifact, or you can add 4 to do both. Prickly Pear is the second highest win rate red common, and that's a 2/2 that enters the battlefield with a 1/1 mercenary. And Discerning Peddler is a third highest win rate red common. That's a 2/2 rogue that when it ETBs you can ramage. And these all show to the same plan of being aggressive and maybe going slightly wide. Hellspur Posse Boss definitely can go wide, but so does Prickly Pear. Descending Peddler is a sort of flood insurance later in the game. Generally, I like the kind of ramaging 2/2. It's a decent creature, and it has decent stats for red, but red is slightly underwhelming. In terms of uncommons, Longhorn Sharpshooter, 3 for a 3/3 reach. But you can plot it for 4, and when you plot it, it can ping something for 2. And Scalestorm Summoner is the second best red card. It's 3 mana for 3/3. When it attacks, you create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. And then Gila Courser is the third best red uncommon. That's a 3 mana for a 4/2. So a big change from the previous 3 mana 3/3s. It's a mount, and when it attacks when saddled, you exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. So you can do it tapped, and don't worry, and cast the card later. And it has Saddle of 1, which is very convenient with the mercenaries. You can just tap 1 mercenary, and that's done. Okay, green bombs, and this is page 1 of 4 of the cards that fulfill that criteria. And we have, which should tell you something, that I didn't find a single blue bomb, but I have 4 pages of green bombs. Bristlebud Farmer, it's 2 green for a 5/5 trample, which is already good in my book. I don't mind playing a 5/5 trampler for 4 mana. Remember in Dominaria when you had the green-red signpost and it was a 5/5 and sometimes had trample? It was good enough to give it a hybrid cost. Well, this one just 2 green, no problem. Also makes 2 food tokens when it ETBs, so that's like already some sort of better honey mammoth. But when it attacks, you can also sacrifice a food, and if you do mill 3 cards, and you may put a permanent card from among them into your hand. So it draws your card with a plenty amount of selection. That card is super busted. I had it in one of my decks, and I can tell you, I didn't draw it a single time, so I don't know how it plays. By the way, that's one of the 2 cards like that on this list. Bristly Bill is the second best red card. 2 mana mythic. It has landfall. When the land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature, and then for 5 mana you can double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. It's just For a long time, I thought, okay, it doubles the number of +1/+1 counters on one creature you control. No, each 1, 2, 4, 8. It goes very quickly. It's great because at the base it's a 2-mana 2/2. If you play it on turn 3, it's a 2-mana 3/3. Potentially with the protection of something, or you can play a tap land. And later in the game, just don't play out all your lands if you have Bill in your deck, and then you can sometimes, like, even like in the super late game when the board is slightly clogged, you just cast it, you play a land, you tap 5 mana extra, it becomes a 4/4 all of a sudden. If it doesn't die this turn, next turn you play another land, you make it into it's just completely gets completely out of hand. And then another card that I drafted but never drew, so I have no idea how it works, but I can imagine pretty well. Railway Breaker, 3 green, 5/5 reach trample. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is its power. And it has a plot for 3 and a green, so it's also easy to splash despite the 2 mana, 2 green cost in its cost. Yeah, it's really good. But as I said, there are 4 pages of green bombs, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them. You can find them on 17 Lands and just read them. I just look at the top 3. In terms of the top commons, there is one that is head and shoulders above the rest, and I think that this is actually a significant piece of information here, because we're talking about, this early data is still early data, but the advantage that Throw from the Saddle has over every single other green card is big, despite green being really strong. So this is a first pickable card as an interaction spell, it seems to me. And it still goes like criminally late sometimes. I've seen it like pick 11 or something. Card is great. It's probably the best common in the set by quite a margin. And just don't sleep on it. It's just like the value of it. It's just 2 mana for a bite spell is already not terrible, but giving a permanent +1/+1 counter is great. When you think about it, it's lacks the blowout potential of Clear Shot, but it's very close to Clear Shot for 1 mana less, which is insane. It's very close to being Savage Smash for 1 mana less and easier to cast and fitting in every deck. And sometimes it's better because it leaves the counter on the thing that killed. So I do draw your attention to this card. If you still are not convinced whether you should pick it, you should probably up it in your pick order by quite a lot. Second best win rate creature is Cactarantula. 4 green for a 6/5 with reach. It costs 1 less if you control a desert. So if you control 2 deserts, it still costs only 1 less. You don't get a discount. You won't be able to cast it for 2 mana if you have the right deck. But 5 mana for a 6/5 with reach is good, especially when that creature has the ability, whenever it becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. And because this thing is a must kill, you will at least always get the card back if they kill it. Rare situations when you manage to force opponent to block it and you have combat trick, or when you have your Cactarantula and you're forcing them to block with it, they won't get a card. So, but it's still great, especially with the third card on the list, Snakeskin Veil, because sometimes your opponent will target Cactarantula only to see Snakeskin Veil countering the interaction spell, and not only they draw a card, but also protect the Cactarantula, and it grows into a 7/6, which is already a 3-turn clock. And 3-turn clocks are important. So great cards both. And Snakeskin Veil, it's another one. You can get it very late still, but I'm pretty sure that you can play 2 copies in every green deck that you have, and you will be happy about it. Green top uncommons, and here we have also the Mythic Uncommon of the set in Outcaster Greenblade. 2 green for a human mercenary, so it's an outlaw. Came up for me a couple of times when you play some sort of, I don't know, Naya deck. Also, it doesn't die to the black removal because it's a mercenary. It's a 1/2, so looks benign, but of course it's not. It's basically a Nazgul, but in green, because it gets +1/+1 for each desert you control. And when it ATBs, you can search your library for a basic land or a desert card and put it into your hand and then shuffle. So if you started your game with a desert and you play it on turn 3, it's already a 2/3. And you draw another desert, becomes a 3/4. And biggest one I had so far was a 6/7, and that's big for a 3 mana creature. It's sort of does remind me of a Nazgul, but also a Nazgul that later in the game just doesn't need anything else, and it just comes in and it's already big, which is a great kind of an ability. And it's by far the best uncommon in the set, like by far. Spinewood Armadillo is the second best green uncommon, 4 green for a 7/7 reach, ward 3. That ward 3 is so annoying when you play against. It's so annoying. It's just like, oh my god, I was almost there, and now you play this thing and you just basically stabilize. But wait, there's more. It has 2 mana discarded, and you can search your library for a basic land or a desert and put it in your hand. Then shuffle, you gain 3 life. And this ability is just so good in green black because you can just get some life cushion, get the lands you need, and then you cast back for more, or the 5 mana reanimation spell in green black, or you cast the Ratstein in the next turn and you have a very good target to return, and next couple of turns you have cheaper creatures. It's so many things that you can do in green black, and this is a card that I would particularly heavily prioritize if I'm green black. But it's good in all the other on all the other shells. Green red, it's a creature with power 4 or greater, which is also great. I don't know, Yargle. I think that the interaction part, the word part, is an active attempt to slow the format down. That was a big problem with those mopey decks with big creatures. That I'm casting my 6/6 colossal dreadmaw. Okay, removal, and now I'm attacking, and you're dead. It's not going to be so easy when you have to pay 7 mana to remove something like that, which gives them at least a fighting chance. Look, this creature is already disadvantaged by the fact that it costs 6 mana. Yeah, but then we can. So there is always drawbacks, Yargo. Like you say, okay, slowing down the format would be lowering power toughness of the 1 and 3 drops. You're right. I agree with that. But then you run into a trap of going to the next M14 or whatever it was that the format just takes forever and is glacial because nothing can kill. You want an action-packed game that doesn't end on turn 7, and I think that for that approach, putting extra ward here and there is not a bad thing because it still allows relatively good pace, but it doesn't bring the games into okay, turn 14, I draw, play a land. Opponent draws, plays a land, and then who first draws the bomb is the ultimate winner. I think that this would be the risk that they would be running if they would just lower the power toughness of the early drops and slow the format through that. But of course, I might be wrong. I'm not saying also that you are wrong in any way. And also, I'm sure that there were people who were fanatically loving the M14 format, whichever it was, with the draw spells were the best bombs. And the last one, we have Stubborn Burrow Fiend. That's a 2-mana mount. It's a 2/2, and when it becomes saddled, you mill 2 cards, and then it gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Again, great card in green black, but it also works fine in green white. It also works fine in green red because it gets the power and toughness boost as it's being saddled, which is very different from most of those things that get the boost when they attack. And that means that it can get to 4 power before the attacks, and then therefore it can attack as a creature with power 4 or greater, which sometimes is an important thing. You can, for example, with this being a 4/4, you can attack with the 3/3 wolf for 2 mana and stuff like that. Then we have multicolor bombs. We have plenty of those as well. Bonipal Clear Cutter. If you don't know the card, pray that you will never, at least from the opposing side. 6 mana, 6/5 in Simic. It has reach. That's already good. 6 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you create a bow, and legendary blue ox creature with this creature's power and toughness is each equal to the number of lands you control. And when you attack, not when Bonipal attacks, not when Bow the blue ox attacks, when anything attacks, You might draw a card, and then you might put a land from your hand on or graveyard into the battlefield. It's just like, then you have Roxanne, Starfall Savant, 3 green red for a cat druid. It's a 4/3. And when it ETBs or attacks, you create a meteorite. And if you know the card meteorite, that's exactly what it does. It's a mana rock that pings something for 2 when it ETBs. And whenever you tap an artifact token for mana, add 1 extra mana of that type. Yeah, it's great. It's great. Roxanne is phenomenal. It generates a lot of value. Yeah, I mean, just play this card. Meteorite was badly costed. It cost 5 mana, and it was unplayable. But if it cost 3 mana, it would be great. And if it would cost 3 mana here, Roxanne would have been a 2 mana 4/3 creature, which is also great. So yeah, you see the rate on that thing, and then you can get another meteorite, for example, and you're splashed for days if you have Roxanne and you have mana for everything. I didn't think that Sherkovic was old enough to know the police. Oh. I know that my boyish looks deceive you, but I am older than some forms of carbon. Okay, Rakdos the Muscle is the third one. That's 2 black green, or 2 black red for a legendary creature. Believe it or not, it's a demon, but it's also a mercenary in this particular set. Flying Trample 6/5. Whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile cards equal to its mana value from the top of target player's library. Until your next end step, you may play those cards, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. That's already good. But how will you sacrifice creatures, you might ask me? Well, you can sacrifice another creature, and Rakdos gains indestructible until end of turn, tap it. You can only activate it once each turn. I did see the original Dune with Sting, but I didn't see it in the theaters. I was too young. I'm not that old. So basically, with Rakdos, you can have several plans, and all of them are good. You smash them with the giant creature. Sometimes you will mill them by sacrificing 2 creatures of with 5 or 6 mana value, and you still get to cast to play the cards that you exiled with it. So yeah, a great creature. Uncommons, top uncommons in multicolor. Buried in the Garden. You know that from the previous set, so I'm not going to explain it. Oblivion Ring, that enchants land and gives extra mana. Then you have Congregation Gryph, 1 green-white for a flying lifelinker mount. It's a 1/4, and when it attacks while saddled, it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of mounts you control, and it saddles for 3. It counts itself, so if you saddle it, it will be at least a 2/5 when it attacks. And Miriam, Herd Whisperer, green-white, very much like other cards, for a 3/2, a human druid. As long as it's your turn, mounts you control and vehicles you control have hexproof, and also whenever a mount or vehicle you control attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So Miriam is pretty good as well, but all 3 of the top uncommons in multicolor are white-green, which is something to think about. Right, so let's go through all the archetypes now, because why wouldn't you? And I have the same layout for them. I start with the commons, and I pick best common, Hidden Gem, a card I selected for some reason, and usually I'll give you the reason why I selected this particular card that is maybe slightly underappreciated, or maybe slightly surprising to me, so I assume maybe to some other people because of that. And I will also select 1 card that is a trap, and it's usually a card that either looks like it might be fitting in a particular archetype, but it doesn't have the numbers, or a card that is played highly or picked quite highly and still doesn't give the numbers. So there will be a couple of scenarios, and I also will try to give the rationale why I think it's a particular trap. In case of blue-white, key commons, Phantom Interference is the best common, 58.9% game and hand win rate. The Spree card that is a counter or makes a 2/2 white spirit. We talked about it before as one of the best blue commons. And it's the best card in terms of win rate in blue-white. Just probably does very well what this deck wants to be, which means not casting spells on your turn. And this is a great spell not to cast on your turn, as most of the time you'll be trying to counter something that opponent plays on their turn. And you can keep the mana up, and you can mask the fact that you're keeping the mana up, because you probably have quite a lot of instant speed interaction as well. So they will have a choice of, well, I can cast nothing, and then end of turn you cast your interaction spell, or I can cast something and I'm risking that I will play into Phantom Interference. I think that the card will become slightly less good later in the format, because people will learn how to play around it. In the end, it only taxes you by 2 mana, so you're probably going to try to avoid playing your most valuable spells into Phantom Interference mana open, and wait for the moment when you can just cast it without the risk of getting countered, because there's not so many counter spells in this format. Hidden Gem I selected is Stop Cold. It's a 3 and a blue for an enchantment aura. It has flash. Artifact or creature can be enchanted by it, and when it enters the battlefield, you tap the enchanted permanent, and it loses all abilities and doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. It overperforms. It only has 56% game and hand win rate in this deck, but it generally is a card that looks quite playable in this format. And we've had a bunch of those auras that tap a creature being very unsuccessful and being cards that I actively disencourage from playing. So the fact that I put it as a hidden gem means that in this format it looks like it's pretty decent, because of the loss of the abilities, because of the instant speed that you can cast it, and a couple of those small things add up and make it into a playable card. Also, it only costs 1 blue in the cost, which sometimes they do cost blue something, and then they need to be played in heavily blue decks. Well, this one is. I'm not saying splash it, because it's not powerful to be splashed, but you can play it in your deck that is mainly green and has some blue spells, for example. The trap I selected is Razzle Dazzler, a 2 mana human wizard. It's a 1/2, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can't be blocked this turn. It has only 46% win rate, which is pretty bad, even if the white-blue is not the strongest archetype. It just doesn't fit with the plan, because you either want to be casting 0 spells on your turn or 2 spells on your turn. Now, you can arguably cast 2 spells on the opponent's turn and still get a counter, but you lose the benefit of the unblockability. So it's just not designed for this deck. It's a card that picked relatively highly, so I think maybe some people will fall into trap of trying to play it. Please don't. Key uncommons. Lassoed by the Law is the best uncommon with 62% game and win rate. That's the Oblivion Rung that makes a mercenary. Even though white-blue is not an aggressive archetype, it's still good. The mercenary gives you time to cast this spell, because you cast it, you remove the best creature that the opponent has, or best permanent that the opponent has that is not a land. So you have quite the flexibility there, and the 1/1 can chump whatever will be hitting you next turn, so it can gain you some life, even in the controlling deck. And this is great, because I don't think that this card would have been as good in white-blue if the mercenaries would not be allowed to block. This is like one of those small things when that change increases the power of slower decks, because white-blue is unequivocally going to be one of the slower decks in this format. So the fact that it benefits from this card is due to the change of mercenaries in the design process, and that's, you can see what impact those small changes can have on the format. Essence Capture is my hidden gem. This card we know it's good, but frequently it's been treated like, whatever. It has a really good win rate in this archetype. 60.2% game in hand win rate is really good in a decent archetype, and white-blue is so far, not amazing. So the fact that this one has 60% win rate means that you should be picking it. I'm not saying aggressively, because it still goes quite late, but you should definitely pick it among your top cards for the archetype. So you shouldn't just pass it because you see some kind of mopey 3-mana creature. Talking about mopey 3-mana creatures, Shackle Slinger is a trap that I selected, 52.5% win rate. It's a 3-mana human soldier, 3/2, and when you cast your second spell each turn, choose target creature an opponent controls. If it's tapped, put a stun counter on it, otherwise tap it. Again, you don't plan to cast 2 spells on a turn. This card goes highly, so I selected it because it goes highly. It just shouldn't be in this particular deck. It maybe has the other homes where it's better. White-black, the key commons. The best common for white-black, and I was very surprised by seeing that, is Ariet's Lullaby. 2 mana sorcery, destroy target tapped creature, you gain 2 life. It has 61.7% win rate, which is a lot. And I am absolutely sure that when people start using some of the cards that are on this list, and if you look at the 17 lands data for white-black, you see a couple of those surprising cards quite high there. If you start putting those and playing them in your white-black decks, your win rate is going to probably slightly increase. And that's why I think that Orzhov is one of the color pairs that is, for me, a potential climber for the next couple of weeks. Second, the Hidden Gem, and I think it's the second win rate common for white-black as well, is Rooftop Assassin. That's the 4 mana flash flying lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature and opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. 61% win rate. It's a lot. And this tells me that this is a deck where the most important feature of it is you are going to lose the early game and go dangerously low with your life, and that extra life from Ariet's Lullaby, that extra life from Rooftop Assassin, are the things that bring you back to the game and allow you to drag it long enough where you start actually winning it with whatever combination of attrition. Look at those life gain cards for the white-black. The data suggests that this is where the secret of building successful versions of the Orzhov decks is. And I'm, again, quite convinced that this might be a climber if people start drafting it well, or if you know things in advance, you can already start winning slightly more with it just because you have the information that other people might not have. It's a trap. I selected Mystical Tether. It has a 55% win rate, game in hand win rate, which is not terrible by any stretch of imagination, but it's significantly lower. And I think that one of the reasons for that is that it's a white removal. If you are in white-black, you want to be in white-black when black is open, and then you should have access to better black removal. Because I do think that even though Mystical Tether is 1 mana cheaper, the black removal spell, the 4 mana exile target creature, is just better because it doesn't leave you an enchantment that can be destroyed later in the game. So it's more permanent than Mystical Tether is. And if you're playing this grindy deck, you don't want to leave too many Oblivion Rings on the battlefield because they will inadvertently at some stage going to be destroyed. Okay. In terms of uncommons, Lassoed by the Law is still the best, despite being an Oblivion Ring, but that one mercenary that it creates is just exactly what you need. Because imagine a curve out of this, by the way, 65.7% game in hand win rate. And this is another hint to me that white-black is actually a good deck. It's just we didn't learn how to build them correctly, because this is a very high win rate. It means that if you have the right cards, the deck wins quite a lot. Like best color combinations have the top uncommon with this kind of a win rate. So I would be thinking very hardly about how to build Orzhov decks. Imagine you curve in Lassoed by the Law. It's not really a curve out, but whatever. Lassoed by the Law into next turn, Ruthless Lawbringer, sacrifice that mercenary that you create and destroy whatever permanent you want. Ruthless Lawbringer, by the way, the hidden gem, 62.2% game in hand win rate. Also, it's pretty high for a card that is like in top 3 of the colors combinations. And the trap I selected is Humiliate. It's a black-white card, therefore it might create an impression that you should be playing it in your black-white decks, but it only has 54.5% win rate, which is not impressive at all. And I think it just does a couple of things that this deck doesn't really need. There are not that many excellent 1-drops for the deck. Maybe, there is the black 1/1 that dies into a 1/1 mercenary. But apart from that, not much. So you probably don't want to cast it on turn 2. And then on later turns, you might not have good targets for it. And you still might not have a creature that would really benefit from casting Humiliate. So numbers are not in its favor. I'm sure that in some deck it's going to be just fine, but it's not something you should highly prioritize. Boros, and you will see the difference in the potential of the color, because Boros has similar win rate to Orzhov, but the best common in Boros is Sterling Keykeeper at 56.9. I had to double check if that's even true, but the win rates of individual cards in white-red were really low at common, which means to me that this color lacks something synergistic. It's the forgotten archetype, but they didn't properly build the mechanisms for it. Because you see, the Lullaby had 61.7 in Orzhov, which has similar win rate, slightly higher, but similar win rate. And here we only have 57% win rate for the best common in the color combination. Interesting, though, we've seen so far 3 white archetypes, and there were 3 different top commons in them, and 2 of them were white, so actually 2 different cards already are top white commons, which shows you that there is a bit more diversity in terms of the commons, in terms of power level in this set. In the previous set, every single white archetype we looked at, the Novice Inspector was the best thing, and then Insight Source was the second best thing, and it was just like they were universal. While here, there is more potential of building the white decks, and you will utilize different cards. The data does suggest, though, that white-red is one of the color combinations that you shouldn't get too excited about in white. While I said Orzhov for me is one of the potential growers, and Selesnya is the best archetype. So there are definitely 2 good white decks, but the other 2 maybe not up to the same level. Stagecoach Security is the hidden gem I selected, 56.4% win rate, slightly lower than the Sterling Keykeeper. That's a 5-mana 4/5. When it ETBs, creatures you control get +1/+1 and Vigilance until end of turn, and you can plot it for 4 mana, so you can just plot it 4, turn 5 cast something, and put this in, or just like at later stage when you have a like good board, you just slam it on the board and attack with Vigilance. Played with the card a bit, and I was not maybe impressed, but I was happy with having it in my deck, so it's not a bad card. And the trap I selected is Reckless Lucky, mainly because there's a lot of talk about this card, and it might look like it's a card that wants to be in the white-red aggressive deck. It's the 1-mana Goblin Pirate, first strike haste, and you can sacrifice it to draw a card and create a treasure token. So sort of mockery of Ragavan. Only 51.6% win rate. And I put it there because I didn't believe in the card, and I still don't, and it's picked highly, and it's played a lot in white-red. And I think it should be rethought. Having said that, I played my red-white deck yesterday and went 6-3 with it. And a couple of games I won with Reckless Lucky because I pumped it with Mercenaries, and it became like a 5-2, and they had to block it every turn, and it had first strike, so it was annoying. The key uncommons for white-red, obviously the complementary Lassoed by the Law as the best uncommon, 60.9. That's a lot. Like you see that this deck will be guided by the quality of your uncommons. Hidden gem I selected is Frontier Seeker, not because this card is like doesn't look strong, because the card looks strong, but maybe some people will think that it's not exactly a white-red card because it fits so well in white-green archetype looking for a mount. Frontier Seeker is the 2-mana 2/1. When ETBs look at the top 5 cards of your library, you may reveal a mount card or a plains from among them and put it into your hand. And yeah, I can see that this card is powerful in white-green because it sort of works like the Staunch Crewmate from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, the same thing for pirates and artifacts. But even in here, it has around 60% game and hand win rate, which is really solid. So you can put this card in white-red decks and it will be fine. The trap card I selected is Prosperity Tycoon, because this is a card that looks exactly like it would be a great card in the white-red, but it only has 51.7% win rate. Prosperity Tycoon is a 4-mana 4/2, human noble. When it ETBs, you make a mercenary, and you can tap. You can pay 2, sacrifice a token, and it gains indestructible until end of turn, and then you tap it. This card looks like, and I was convinced it is going to be a decent white-red card. Turns out numbers say that, at least for now, It doesn't impress in this particular color pair. 51.7 is not something you should be looking at. That doesn't mean that the card is unplayable, as you may or may not see in a second. Okay, now the menace of the format. I'm using it very loosely, but I'm sure that I will be hearing like, oh no, green-white is busted, the format is ruined and solved. It is the highest win rate deck. I don't think it's the best deck. And I'm going to tell you when the time comes, but be ready for that. I think it's a very strong deck. I do think that there is a better deck in the format, and white-green is gaining a lot from the first week aggro bump. And we've seen it format after format after format that in the first week, the aggro decks are doing so much better because they're so much easier to build and so much easier to play. I'm saying it's trivial to play aggro decks. It's just easier to figure out a good aggro deck from fundamentals than to figure out a synergistic deck based on a new mechanic that we've never seen in our life before, based on the same fundamentals. That's just it. Still, a very strong deck. Best common is a Take Up the Shield, 62.3%. That's impressive. Hidden Gem I selected, and there are plenty of good cards in this archetype, but I selected this one because I think it was the one that was the most surprising to me and is going quite late in the draft. So this is the card you might be keeping your eyes open for when you're drafting white-green. Is Sterling Supplier, 5 mana for a 3/4 with flying, and when it ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. So it cannot ramp itself, but when you think about it, if it could, that would be a 5 mana 4/5 air elemental, which would be just great. But it can pump something else, so it comes with the sort of like same stats. In a deck that has a lot of creatures, which your mount deck will arguably almost always have, it sort of counts like I don't know, one of those creatures that is a 3/3 and a 1/1 for 4 mana. But this one is a 5 mana, but you pay 1 extra mana for a flying and an extra point of toughness. The trap I selected is Ariad's Lullaby. We just seen this card as the top. Whoa. Who was that? Oh, Ben Werney. Thank you, Ben. I know how much you love data, so glad that you came here to see some. Thank you for the raid. We're just explaining different archetypes. So which cards are the best commons in each according to the game and hand win rate so far? Which cards are maybe less obvious but perform quite well in the given archetype? And then which card looked like our trap in each individual color pair. So I was just saying that Ariad's Lullaby was surprisingly to me and to many people in the chat the best common so far in the Orzhov decks, and that Orzhov decks look like they might be strong in the future when people learn how to draft them better, based on the cards like Ariad's Lullaby, based on the cards like Rooftop Assassin. But Ariad's Lullaby all of a sudden is a trap in the white-green decks, which just shows you how archetype-specific the cards in this set are compared to the last set, where everything was roughly the same power level independently of the color pair it was played in. 51.8%, and if you remember in white black it was 61.7%. Again, those things will maybe revert to the mean, become slightly closer over time, but it's a good signal to me that this card has specific homes and white-green is not one of those homes. So key uncommons, and you're going to see that a lot. Outcaster Greenblade, 65.2% game and hand win rate, is the best uncommon in white-green, and I think it's the best. No, it's not the best uncommon in every green deck. It's the best uncommon in all but one green decks, and it's still in the other one. It's still like in top 3 definitely. The card is busted. I already told you this is the Nazgul. 3 mana for a 1/2 that grows very easily and grows each other copy of itself because you fetch for more deserts. I'm pretty sure you want to be playing at least 2 deserts in your deck when you have Outcaster Greenblade, preferably 3, because making it like into a 4/5 is just... Here we have another flip-flop. Hidden Gem I selected for this archetype is Prosperity Tycoon. a card that was just described as a trap in red-white decks because of its low win rate. Lo and behold, it has a 62.6% win rate in white-green. I don't know exactly why this particular card is so good. I can imagine that playing white-green, you will have some 4-power synergies incidentally in your deck, which is maybe one of the reasons why it will happen. Maybe that extra mercenary is important because you don't have access to too many mercenaries, and that they might be beneficial for your first striking beasts or whatever. Whatever the reason, Prosperity Tycoon goes from like completely bad in red whites, at least so far according to data, to one of the top uncommons. And it's not like in top 3, it's not even probably in top 5 because there's quite a pack of really strong cards in green white, but it's up in there and the numbers are good enough. I mean, it's still going to be better than the best common in that archetype, which tells you one thing, that you should be getting ready for the future, that green white is by quite a large margin driven by the power of the cards at the higher rarity than common. So once the archetype is going to be properly prioritized by the people on your pod, you might have a problem with drafting a good green-white deck. Until then, enjoy. I already stopped being able to draft it at will, and I had to move somewhere else. But I'm also happy to do that because I do prefer drafting obscure archetypes early so that I can learn them, especially if, like in the case of this format, it looks like I'm in for the long haul and I'm going to be playing it until the last day that it's possible, and try to explore as many possible weird combinations as I can. I didn't draft Big Boros yet. I think that I'm not ready to go into those specific kind of sub builds yet. I'm going to leave it for like week 3 when when I played like 30 drafts and I analyzed data from millions of games rather than basing it on 50,000 games or so. The trap I selected for this archetype, Omenport Vigilante, a 2/2 that gets double strike when you commit a crime. It just seems like white-green is not particularly great in making crimes, and you have better 2-drops at common already. So 53.4% for this particular archetype is really low. So I would be cautious about playing Omenport Vigilante in your white-green decks. Although I can imagine that you will have some things. The problem is that, especially in white-green, your interaction will be frequently Snakeskin Veil and Take Up the Shield. Neither of those two commit a crime, so you will have much fewer ways of triggering. What is interesting to note is I think Take Up the Shield is not actually the best common in this archetype. I didn't select the best common in this archetype because it is the red-green dual land, and it's one signal to me that and like in top 4 commons we had also the white-red dual land. It is a strong signal to me that Naya specifically as an archetype played within a white-green deck with splashing a couple of things from red is a highly playable thing, and it actually can improve the win rate of the color by splashing the right cards, especially when you have like the Outcaster Greenblade that can fetch you those red mana producing deserts. So don't sleep on speculating on red containing deserts when you're drafting white-green, because pack 3 open what's his name, Bruce Tarl or something like that, you're happily splashing it into your deck, and the cost will be probably low because you probably will have Outcaster Greenblade or something like that. So this is the top win rate color so far, but as I said, I don't think it's going to be the top win rate color pair for long. I think that actually another deck is stronger, and data suggests that it will shift soon, I think. Hear me out later. Blue-black, the key commons, best common by quite a lot, is the Desperate Bloodseeker, 2 mana 2/2 with lifelink that mills target player. This is what this deck wants. It wants to play long games, and the best way of ensuring that you get into long game with the slower deck is to make sure that you can trade their 2/2 with your 2/2 and gain 2 life. You're happy as a clam if you manage to do that. The hidden gem I selected is my personal favorite. I was high on that card before the set was released, and I still think it's one of the really good cards that maybe don't get enough attention, and it's Ambush Gigapede. It's 4 black for a 6/2 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Now, it has a very good numbers in this deck. 59.2% game and win rate. For me, this card is Back for More. Back for More is the green-black instant for 6 mana. And when you cast it, you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it fights something. Yeah, that's basically it. So you cast it when opponent attacks you, you bring something big back, it pinks something, and then you can block and it kills something. And most of the time, if you want to fight, you probably lose your creature, or you can kill something smaller and then something second smallest. But not always you have that luxury. And it's an uncommon, and it's in green black. This card is purely black, but it does a lot of similar things to Back for More. I'm not going to argue that it's better than Back for More. I think that Back for More is a better card, but it's not that far off, because when you think about it, you cast it on your on your opponent's turn when they attack. You give -2/-2 to something, which is sort of like fighting. You kill something smaller. I mean, even if you bring back a 4/4, you're probably not going to fight with a 4/4 because you want to keep that creature for something else. You're going to fight with a 2/2 or something. And Ambush Gigapede does that job relatively well. And then you have a 6/2, and a 6/2 can block quite a lot of creatures in this format and kill them. Or if you are the attrition archetype, you draw it late, it presents a very fast clock that your opponent has to deal with. And potentially, you cast it, you remove something, and then you have a 6/2 ready to attack, and you can swing the corner quite quickly with this Ambush Gigapede when you played your attrition game and you stripped opponent of all their resources, and you have that as your finisher. So I would draw your attention to the fact that this card might be good, and all those things were working in my head, but it's nice to see somewhat vindicated by the data that show that it has this relatively high win rate. The card I selected as a trap is the Black Snack Buzzard. 3 mana, 2/1 flyer. When it ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on it if a creature died this turn, and it has a +2. It's a card that just doesn't work on the plan. You don't want to be spending your turn 2 plotting it, because that puts you even more on the back foot. I don't know where you want to play it, and it's just too small to be lethal in a format that has, I don't know, like 29 green creatures, green and red creatures with reach. So those smaller flyers have a really big problem going through, because there's so many 3/3s with reach in this set that it's wild. And numbers suggest that my intuition is good. 50.2% game and win rate is not particularly impressive. In terms of the key uncommons, I told you the 3/2 flyer is not a good finisher, because it just dies to a whiff from a sneeze from a green or red reach creature. Marauding Sphinx is the polar opposite of that, and the win rate is confirming that. 60.4 game and win rate, which arguably is less than Desperate Bloodseeker's game and win rate, just to show you how important that Desperate Bloodseeker seems to be for this particular archetype. But this creature, I've been playing against it way too many times that I wanted to, because I never want to play against it. It's super annoying. It has Ward 2. It is a 5 mana 3/5 Vigilance flyer. So I can't attack into it with my small creatures, because it would just eat them. It's really expensive to kill it. And it just goes 3 damage, 3 damage, 3 damage, and just my life disappears in front of me while they are using it as a sort of roadblock for me. Also, whenever you commit a crime, you surveil 2, which gives the grindier deck like so much card selection. Card is great in any circumstances for the blue decks in this format, but I think blue-black, particularly with its commit crime theme, is where the cards shine. Hidden gem, I selected Tyrant Scorn, not because it's like surprising that it's good in blue-black. It is a blue-black card. but it still goes late, later than other blue black cards. So, but has better numbers than them. So probably people are still underdrafting it. I mean, half of the reason is probably that they cannot see that it's a blue black card from it when by looking at it, because this particular frame is not one of the more successful ones, I would say. It's very hard to read which color is a card, and that's a problem. But 59.1% game and win rate, pretty decent. And the trap I selected, Rictus Robber, 4 mana for a 4/3. When it ETBs, if a creature died this turn, you create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token. Again, problem with this card is that in this deck, you probably just should always cast it as a 4/3 on turn 4, and then you don't get the extra value. And if you don't get an extra value, it's a vanilla 4/3, and that's not good enough. You don't want to plot it on 3 because, again, you're going too far behind in the game. If you want to be casting it later, better find yourself a card that is better later than Rictus Robber. So yeah, it's just not on the plan. Okay, blue-red, the sick man of this format so far. It's drafted a lot. It's the third most drafted archetype, and it has the lowest win rate so far. Now, I don't know. Is it the fact that people go too much about the casting 2 spells a turn synergy? Well, this deck will come together very rarely. Because I can imagine that the casting 2 spells deck can be good if you get a good version of it. But I think because it's drafted highly by 17 lands users, I assume it's also drafted relatively highly by the non-17 lands users. And because of that, you just rarely get a good version of it. And I do think that there might be just a different version of the deck that is better than the 2 spells a turn, that we are still to uncover. I'm sure that someone uncovered it, but it's just not apparent from data. Prickly Pear is the top common, but only 55% game and hand win rate, which is not impressive. And then Hidden Gem, I selected Take the Fall because it still goes late in the draft. And it's one of the premium cards for the archetype, I think, because it's a 1-mana cantrip. And it can create situations when it's a 2-for-1 relatively easy. Trap, I selected the Seize the Secrets. 2 and a blue for a sorcery, draw 2 cards, but it costs 1 less if you've committed a crime this turn. This looks like potentially would be good because you have a bunch of spells that commit crimes. You need a bunch of cards to double spell, but it has a 48.4% win rate, which is very low. So this is one of the things that points me to casting 2 spells a turn is hard. And we had this archetype so many times, and it never was really super successful. So now that we've solved, again, spoiler alert, the design team has solved the issue of how to make 4-power matters archetype. And I was very happy. My tweet got retweeted by Dave Humphreys, and quoting the 17 lands data as a proof that they successfully managed to solve the Gruul archetype after hundreds of attempts, according to his words. Next one on the menu is how to make I cast 2 spells a turn archetype successful. So I'm interested how that's going to work. Maybe by putting it in the set when there is colorless 1-mana cycling or something. Key uncommons. Best uncommon is Skewer the Critics, but 56.6% win rate. It's not something that impresses me in any way or form. As you see, the Hidden Gem is missing. I looked through the list, I stared blankly at those cards, and I didn't see anything that I could, with clear consciousness, call a gem. So I skipped this one. And Nimble Brigand, I selected as a trap. It's a 2 and a blue for a 1/3. Can't be blocked if you've committed a crime this turn. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. This looks like it fits very well in this archetype, but the win rate is 50.3, which is just not good enough. So I selected this as a trap because I think that this is a card that can easily sway people that it's going to be good in this archetype. And, arguably it's going to be good in some. versions of it. It just generically is not powerful enough to pull the archetype through. It might be really good when already you have all the important pieces that can help double spell and commit crimes. Blue green, and here we're looking at another archetype that potentially has an capacity to grow into something better. I told about Orzhov that this is one of my list of archetypes that I think can be improved and can become better as the format progresses. Blue green is another one, and it has a decent win rate already. It's around 56% win rate, which puts it in top 4 if I don't remember correctly. Maybe for the sake of the raiders from Ben's stream, we can go back to the archetype win rate. Here we have the how often are each archetypes played. Simic and Orzhov at 6% are definitely not drafted a lot by the 17 lands users. Rakdos and Izzet are drafted quite a lot. But when we look at it, Rakdos and Izzet have a relatively low win rate. Simic and Orzhov are decent and above average even. So yeah, Simic makes top 5, Orzhov makes top 4. But I think that both of them have a potential to grow because I think that people are still not using the cards that are best for those archetypes in an optimal fashion. Okay, so blue-green key commons, throw from the saddle. As I told you, this is the best common of the set, and it's not exception. It's also good in Simic. 60.2% win rate is pretty solid. But what interested me is the second best common, or there and abouts, Jailbreak Scheme. It's the spree card, blue for casting it, and then you can choose one of the options. Add 3 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and it can't be blocked this turn. And +2, target artifact or creature's owner puts it on top or bottom of their library. And this second option is the what makes the card great. And I think particularly blue-green. Blue-green is the color that will benefit from it the most. I think it's because this color combination seems to be wanting to, stall the board, make sure to survive to the later game, and you have bigger things than them in the later game, and that's how you win. And Jailbreak Scheme is just such a pain. I played against the deck yesterday, and it was just like I cast my 4-drop, and it's a Jailbreak Scheme. Okay, I put it on top. Jailbreak Scheme. Okay, I put it on top. Jailbreak Scheme. I'll put it on top. And at this moment, they're like on 7 mana, and I just drew the same 4/4 every turn for 3 turns in a row. And I just like, all right, I play it now again, and I play even another 4-drop, and they just sent up. Yeah, I don't care. Right now, I have just so much mana, and I can do so many things that you're going to be dead soon. So enjoy your 4/4s. And that's exactly how the game played out, unfortunately. And I think that, I'm talking about an extreme situation when someone cast me 3 of those cards in a row. But just one carefully positioned Jailbreak Scheme can completely shift the momentum of the game. And I think that this is why it has such a high win rate. This type of card, this category of the card in general, the put something on top of the opponent's library or on the bottom, is a card that is played disproportionately more by high win rate players because they understand how good a tempo swing it is and how much better putting something on top of their library is than just bouncing things from to your hand. So it might inflate the win rate of the card slightly, but it still means the card is good if the top players want to be playing it actively. So, however you look at it, the card is at least worth your interest, and you should not glance over it when you see the packs. You have to consider it as a realistically good pick, even if it will go late in the draft, and it still goes quite late in the draft. So you don't have to prioritize it, but at least consider it. You have an empty pack and you think you might be playing blue, just pick your Jailbreak Scheme because you might need it later during that draft. Trop I selected is Hard Bristle Bandit. I don't remember if after day 2 it still is, but on day 1 this one was the highest drafted common of this set. This is picked higher than all the common removal spells and such. And it has only 55% win rate in this archetype, which is below rate. So because it's such a highly picked card, and people, I think, will assume that Simic wants to ramp into things, they might want to put it. And it just turns out that this is not working, at least for now. So be careful about how highly you prioritize this hard bristle bandit when you're trying to play your grindy green decks. It probably all changes a lot if you start playing 3 colors, because having the access to extra fixing is going to be important then. But if you're playing a 2-color Simic deck, not necessarily a card of importance, especially given how high you need to pick it to have it in your deck. Okay, key uncommons in blue-green. Outcaster Green Blade, still good. Nothing changed. It's the best uncommon in 3 of the 4 green archetypes, and that's how it is. Hidden Gem I selected, though. Oh, by the way, just for the chronicle for the people listening, 63.5% win rate. Hidden Gem I selected is Metamorphic Blast. It's a blue for an instant, and it has spree. And for 1 extra, you can turn target creature into 0/1 White Rabbit. And for 3 extra mana, just draw 2 cards. And for 5 mana, you can just turn something into a rabbit and draw 2 cards, which later in the game will become a very good option. This is a 2 mana removal. You're playing a defensive game most likely when you're playing the blue-green. So on the defensive, they attack into you, you block, they maybe play even a trick, you just turn the thing into a rabbit and kill it. Later in the game, turn the thing into rabbit and draw cards. Super late in the game, when you already have the advantage and you dropped your haymaker, they might have like an ankle biter or something, and you jam your 7/7 into their ankle biter. They happily block. You turn the ankle biter into a 1/1 rabbit, draw some cards, and you don't have to trade your finisher for a 1/1 Death Toucher. And the trap card I selected is Outlaw Stitcher, 3 and a blue for a 1/4 human warlock. When it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token, then put 2+1/1 counters on that token for each spell you've cast this turn other than the first. It's just not doing exactly what you want to be doing. You don't want to play multiple spells in a turn in this blue-green deck. You want to be playing things on curve. So you need to play 2-drop on turn 2, 3-drop on turn 3, 4-drop on turn 4, 5-drop on turn 5, and since it's blue-black, I would hope a 6-drop on turn 6, and hopefully that 6-drop is Bonnie Pal. But that doesn't leave much space to double spell. And then later, when you could, you probably are shorter on resources. And also, then this card becomes a finisher. And honestly, this card sucks as a finisher when you have just 6 mana 7/7 that you can play instead that has ward, and not your finisher is a bounceable token that is killed by repulse or something. 53.1, not an impressive number for now. Black-red. Black-red is another problem child. That's the second most played archetype in the format so far, and it's the second least winning archetype. So pretty big delta between how 17 lands users pick it and how much it wins. Best common, 56.6, so nothing to write home about. But maybe it's not the card that you would be thinking when you think black-red. It's Mourner's Surprise. 2 mana sorcery, return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and you create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token. I mean, this sort of suggests to me, if Mourner's Surprise is among the top commons in black-red, that this should be played as a grindy deck and not as an aggressive deck, as I've seen most people playing black-red against me so far. Because this tells me, look, I want to do some trading. After that trading is done, I want to cast Mourner's Surprise, get back my big threat, replay the threat, or get back the lifelinker, replay the lifelinker, and repeat so far. And this is confirmed by and maybe, rebuy the ETB from something. And this is sort of confirmed by the Hidden Gem I selected, which is just a smidgen less winning than the Mourner's Surprise, and it's Fake Your Own Death with 56.4% game and hand win rate. This is a 2 mana instant. Until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, and you create a treasure token. And this is similar. I mean, it's 2 mana recursion. This time doesn't give you a mercenary, but gives you a treasure, and you don't need to pay the mana for the creature that you save with it. So both of those things point me towards a more grindy kind of deck that black-red wants to be. The trap, Conduit Pylons. I didn't mention it, but in several color combinations, and I would encourage you to look through 17 lands data. In several color combinations, the lands like Conduit Pylon or the Mesa, the one that comes into play tapped, and you can choose any color, are among the top 5 commons for those color combinations. But black-red not, which makes me think black-red, you want to play streamlined. You want to stick to black-red and play the black-red cards. Maybe occasionally you might want to splash some white stuff because it will be synergistically linked. But don't go out of your way to try to do it. Black-red seems to do better when it just played black-red. It's just probably not a black-red aggressive deck, but a black-red grindy deck that you're looking to make. So yeah, Conduit Pylons around 50% game and win rate, which is even for this archetype low. And there were a couple of them that were on good only. And then there's a huge drop-off in the win rate. But Should the Sheriff was the best uncommon with 60.9% win rate, which is good. And this sort of proves to me that this card is just good. It has one of the highest win rate of all the black uncommons, despite not hitting roughly 40% of the creatures in the set. So yeah, Should the Sheriff, definitely play it. The numbers are solid for it, and whatever anyone says, numbers are good enough indicator that you should not sleep on it. You should just know that against some decks it might be problematic to find the target, but even if you play a mirror, I'm sure you will find something to kill, especially if you're using the data and you think that things like Gila Courser, the 4/2 mount that whenever it attacks exiles and the saddle exiles something from the top of the library when you can play it for until your next turn's end. Doesn't have the mercenary type, and it looks like it has decent, not great, but decent numbers in the archetype. So if people play that, you will always find like a good target. Arozine, impeccable logics telling that, well, if Should the Sheriff kills 60% of the creatures, it must have 60% game in hand win rate. That's just logical. And, I couldn't agree more. The trap I selected is at knife point because it's a Rakdos card. You would expect Rakdos card is going to be really good in Rakdos decks. It's not. It only wins 50% of the game so far. And I'm sure you can have some builds where it's going to be good, but so far people played it wrong at least. And maybe it's just not good enough. That's it. Black-green. And we're coming to what I think is the best color pair in the format. So yeah, Zach, you were right. It is green-black. Best common, Throw from the Saddle, like in every green combination, because it's the best common in the set, at least for now. 64% win rate for a common is just outrageous. So yeah. Hidden gem I selected is Bristlepack Sentry. I selected it because I don't know how obvious it is that this card is a good card in black-green. It wasn't obvious for me, and it has a decent win rate of 60.5. It's not, probably not even in top 3. I'm actually going to check it. Rarity common. It's not even in top 3, not even close to being in top 3 of the best commons. It's, in fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's 11th best common of the archetype. And it still has 60.5% game in hand win rate. This is why I think that black-green is the best color combination. It's super deep at common. And I think that the win rate of black-green probably suffers a bit from misbuilt decks that occupy too much of the data. It looks to me like if you put the right cards, this deck is going to be absolutely bonkers. So yeah, Bristleback Sentry is one card that you can keep in mind when you're drafting black-green. One card that you probably shouldn't be keeping in mind is Raven of Fell Omens, 56.5% win rate, which is, not very low, but this card is picked highly. Again, it's not the card I particularly liked while reading the set, which is weird because I love Rakish Crew, but I somehow don't like the Raven of Fell Omens. I guess I prefer losing my mercenaries than committing crimes. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like it's an all-star in that particular archetype, even though black-green is grindy, so slowly draining an opponent might be something that you want to put in your repertoire. Just not impactful body enough, I think. Key uncommons, and here we have a nice change. Black-green is the only green archetype where the green sword outrider outcaster greenblade, damn it, so close, is not the best uncommon. We have Spinewood's Armadillo, and it makes sense because of the cycling ability that it has when you can just, or channel actually, when you can just discard it and search your library for a basic land card or a desert and then gain free life. 65.9% win rate, which is green-black has so much reanimation or recursion. And being able to, at will, not only gain 3 life, which is a great cushion that you're getting from it, but also putting a massive creature in your graveyard that you can later reanimate or, God forbid, back for more it, is such a big game. And yeah, I played the Abzan deck with a lot of reanimation. I had one Spinewood's Armadillo. Whenever I drew it early, I just cycled it automatically because I knew that I'm going to draw back for more. And the fact that getting the land brings me, like, thins the deck a bit, minor effect, but more importantly, brings me closer to have the mana to cast this back for more. Hidden gem I selected is Hollow Marauder, not because I think it's particularly hidden for my listeners. I think most of you will figure out that this card is good, but it still goes quite late. So I wanted to say some praises for the card. It's just absolutely great. If you can cast it for 5 mana, you are so good in value because it is basically, as I said earlier, either a great 2-for-1 or a mediocre 3-for-1. And both of those scenarios are something that I'm happy to see. Also, Hollow Marauder will be probably easiest to cast in black-green because you do have the 2 mana zombie that can self-mill you, and you probably want that because you probably will have some graveyard stuff. It also has the Patient Naturalist, the 2/3 eccentric farmer variant. So you can fill your graveyard relatively quickly and maybe, cast it on turn 4 or something, which is amazing deal. Because then it becomes at a very similar power level to the best black card in the set, which is the big score 4/3 that makes an opponent discard a card and you make a clue cycle. But this one draws you cards directly. The trap I selected is Aloe Alchemist. And that's the 3/2 with trample for 2 mana. And when it gets plotted, target creature gets +3/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. And it has plot for 2. I think it's just not on the plan. Like, if you go to the moment when you start swinging, opponent is probably dead, and you don't need that extra boost from Aloe Alchemist. And if you want early drops, you probably can have better defensive early drops than this card is. Because if you're not using the full spectrum of possibilities that the card is offering you, you probably are not going to get good win rate out of that card. You need to use all parts of the buffalo right now, and I wouldn't play Horror Marauder in a deck that doesn't trade a lot or has ways of filling the graveyard, because I don't want to be casting it for 7 mana. I want to be casting it for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that kind of stuff. Still, 58% is decent. It's just like, compared to the 66% that Armadillo has, it's not that impressive. That's why I selected it. With a good point that the 1 extra point of toughness in the common defender creature is allegedly worth 5%. Well, not 5%, 2%, 2 percentage point win rate. Okay, red-green, key commons. And believe it or not, top common is Throw from the Saddle. Still good. 61.2. Hidden gem I selected is because this card is controversial. And lots of people will say that it's an F. And then some people say, oh, no, it's actually playable. And I think in red green it is mildly playable. 57.5% win rate is, like it's not like wow, amazing, but it's decent. So you should at least considering putting it in your deck. Tumbleweed Rising is a 2-mana sorcery. You create an XX green elemental creature token where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So, like obviously perfect curve out will be like 2-drop into 3-mana 4/2 into opponent being tapped out. I cast Tumbleweed Rising. And I get myself a 4/4 and I have mana for interaction, protection, whatever. But yeah, 57.5 is solid numbers. So just keep an eye on it. Again, not telling that you should draft it and put it in every deck. No, just think about it and think about situations where this card would have been a good draw in your games, and try to conclude where you should put it in, how often you should keep it in your deck. The trap I selected, Irascible Wolverine, 2 in a red for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library until end of your turn. You may play the card. Okay, bit annoying that so many of those effects are similar but not the same. So Gila Courser, exiled it till the end of your next turn. So you have a full turn cycle with the card being exiled. No, this one you need to cast the card at the same turn as you cast the Wolverine, which means it's either a turn 8 play because you don't want to mill your 5-drop and then lose the value from the Wolverine. Or if you plot it, you can turn it and cast it on turn 5 and you have enough mana to probably cast most of the stuff in your deck. Key uncommons, and he's back. Outcaster Greenblade, still good. We talked about the card a lot. 64.2% game in hand win rate. A lot. Hidden gem I selected is Trash the Town. Green for a spree card. You can pay 2 extra to put +2/+1/+1 counters on target creature. We can pay 1 more target creature gains trample until end of turn. Probably going to be the least used mode, but sometimes it's going to win games. And then +1 until end of turn, target creature gains. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, draw 2 cards. So you can cycle it for 2 to draw 2 cards. Decent deal if you have like open attacks. You can, for 4 mana, put +2/+2/+2 counters and give the same draw ability. And for the whole shebang, for 5 mana, you get also trample on top of that. And this card is very versatile, and because of the versatility, it reminds me of the green Inscription from Zendikar Rising. There were so many options, and you could use all the combinations of each mode. And if you know exactly when to cast it, you're going to be golden. The problem is that those cards are difficult because you need to know, when do I cash it out for min value? Where do I wait to be greedy and get more value out of it? So you have to figure out good play patterns with this card if you want to be successful with it. And the trap I selected is Cunning Coyote. I think the card is good and maybe even like constructed credentials. Standard, at least. I'm not going to say that it's going to dominate modern or anything, but standard 2/2 haste is always good. And when it ETBs, you boost another creature. So it's a super aggressive card. And I think that red green wants to spend those couple of first turns to develop the board, and then from turn 4 it starts churning out, and Coyote becomes slightly weaker in those kind of situations. Okay, and this is it. We have reached the end. I would like to thank you to the 17 Lands team, Viral Misnomer, Hululu, Grant Wu, and Aleb Alini. Especially Aleb was super busy with making sure that OTJ is on the job. And I would like to thank Fake Jake Brown for helping me with releasing it in the podcast form, even including the design of this lovely logo. That's also Jake's job. Thanks to SSku and Mana Junkie for the music I used at the intro and the podcast version of it. And thanks to my sponsor, MTGA Zone.com. And thanks to my patron, especially the new ones, so Stefan and Jeff. Thank you very much. And if you want to help out, please do subscribe to my Patreon. It's going to be very, very much appreciate that you, as a benefit, you will get access to all my slides and you can watch them through without listening to my voice, which, some people will pay good money for. Oh yeah, and thanks to Bulkbox for giving me my first sales code that people can use and can buy themselves a nice bulk box for that. And with that, I'll see you next week with more data from the new set.